And the story I want to tell you this morning is a little bit like a foreigner comes to South Africa. But let's assume I came from Mars, which is not much farther than California. You come into South Africa, and actually Cape Town is a bit less African than I thought. But what I really thought is what could happen? What would happen if South Africa would be a project, would be a client? And actually, the client doesn't have the money. It's the people who spend the money for the client in the end. So it's a bit of a more complicated chain. And what would be the DNA? And so what would be the DNA of South Africa, and how to discover the DNA and how to develop it, and also make it a thing where you guys are really happy with. And if you analyze DNA, it's kind of the digital code we humans and all nature carry in us. Looks a bit digital, as you see, and it's not mine. We bought it for because mine would be too private, and people could do things to me. So it's a dead person. What I did so far was a virtual journey. So going from this more boring DNA, more scientific, I think the DNA of South Africa, and it's the colors of Jamaica, which is the most African thing we have on the American side. So that would be the colors, I think, more you should look for. And I keep this kind of a theme. By the way, as we are in a creative environment here, you may wonder what is this? And it's an image created by NASA, sending a very expensive spaceship up to Saturn. And it's a ultraviolet photography of the rings of Saturn. So coming down, it's pretty beautiful. And what is to discover here? And normally, naturally, there are some formulas. John Hunt spoke about it. But how to discover South Africa? And one of my favorite band is actually Pink Floyd. And so if you break light, the big mystery is that light has colors. And so the colors of South Africa, I looked a bit, have a couple of friends from here, is the languages. And I live in a multicolored country. I mean, I'm German born, that's correct, but we already grew up with 3 languages. My native language is not German. It's not, so many of my German clients ask me to speak English. It's actually the Swiss South German, Aleman, which is about twice as fast as German. So when you are South German and look at, watch a German movie, the love scenes are ridiculous because my wife said it's like 2 people get into a very complicated contract. And so it gives an idea about emotionality. But looking at the multiple languages, I can only speak English here. Afrikaans I can understand because I get a bit of Dutch. But it's many languages, and it's also nature. And naturally, it's looking from the outside in. I hope I don't insult too many of you. But actually, gold is something people know about South Africa. It's about the tribal music, the rhythm, which as a jazz fanatic, rock and roll fanatic, I also love very much. It's about rhythm. It's about naturally football, soccer. And it's actually true because I thought one thing my wife and I can give back to the world by having relatively fortunate outcome economically is to do a soccer club and help America to win the World Cup. And so in any case, we will be back in 2010, and I apologize for the New Zealand guy who did this World Cup to Germany. I think it was extremely unfair, but speaking of Nelson, my wife gave me this shirt, so she said, take down this jacket. Then on the wine industry, we were there yesterday, even if, as I read, it's kind of not very fair to whatever, but although the wine industry is an important image of South Africa, it's the joy of life. And I think that's what I like, especially in our company and in America, also the Latin element, the African element. It's the joy of life because being born as a Puritan in Europe, in Germany they tell you the total happiness is only to be achieved by doing your duty. And that is not a good recipe for a happy life. So diamonds, pretty industrial. And it's fashion. I think we talked about it yesterday. Fashion is certainly one aspect of South Africa where you have a lead over the rest of the world already, in terms of beauty, in terms of colorfulness, in terms of shapes and emotions. It's also about money. I mean, South Africa is the biggest investor in the African economy overall. It's about nature, and I mean, that's one of the images going out of the world for tourism. And actually, it's about golf. So, Gary Player still, I saw him a couple times, great representative of this country. And actually, ultimately, what we call the old African color, folklore, being not deviated by modern technology, by modern society, this egalitarianism, being individual. So now, taking from there to languages, going to design languages. And naturally, that's a bit of an oxymoron, because how can design be a language when it doesn't sound? But it does sound. For example, if a car door is shabby, it's not a good car. If a watch would not click noise, it's not a good watch. It's all about proportion. It's so much more. And for example, we had a pretty good schooling in terms of what is perception. And people make their perception about something within seconds. Some people do it in nanoseconds, because the way we grew up in nature over many thousands of years, if we didn't make a good decision the first half second, we got eaten. And so that made us pretty fit. And I mean, also what John Hunt explained with Steve Jobs, when I came to Apple, they had all this stuff, and they were explaining why it was good, and then my English wasn't that good yet. I came back from Japan, and so they said, Hartmut, what do you think? I said, you want my honest opinion? He said, yeah. I said, it's shit. Because it's nothing. I mean, how can you explain this into good? Okay, then I said, let's be shit. So kept a while also, advertising me helped a lot. And the funny thing was, 2 years later, we had a similar situation, and I was more polite. I said, Hartmut, sorry to tell you, your English improved too much. It's okay. And he said it. And speaking of Apple, I mean, the one thing about Apple was make it simple. This is, by the way, a scene which we took the ideas from. I mean, I like the ideas that go back to history or to fiction, either very way back or very way ahead. And I think that is where you find the middle and the interesting stuff. And what we liked about Clarke's Odyssey 2000 and the movie made of it was, 2001 to be precise, it's the idea that a geometric shape which would express knowledge. It was not a natural shape, and you can argue it, but the point is that a geometric shape would express intelligence. Personally, in the meantime, I don't agree with you anymore. I have later some other examples we made for you today. I think intelligence is more than just geometry. If you look at Dyson, design language of Dyson is functionality inside out, so like a rocket ship connects to that. In Sony, when I came to Japan, everybody expected me to be European, and I saw the Japanese history. First time I discovered actually that our teachers had lied to us. They told us the Bauhaus is the inventor of clean architecture. The truth is Japanese house is the inventor of clean architecture. And the Vienna architect who came back from Japan in 1890 just didn't tell where he learned it, the secession and all this thing. So I used the tatami and simplicity to bring Sony back to Japan. And actually that still defines the brand in many things. If you look at Microsoft, also an interesting client actually, and also actually much more sympathetic people than they look in public. But that has to do with the power of the money. I mean, speaking of carbon neutral, there's, for example, one thing in Microsoft that of all the companies on earth, even Google, they are the one who produce their revenue with the least consumption of materials and energy. So if you buy a Windows, it's about 50 cents material. And if you save the book, it's about a couple of pennies. The idea was to make Microsoft more American, and the language we created with Windows XP was really going back to the great design ages of American car design, which actually was not very ecological, but at least they were looking good. And I think there's also one point, when I came to America, it took me about 10 years to convince American companies to apply design for business. And only when we were successful with Sony in Japan, we could convince Americans. And I think it's also something for South Africa. Look how you can be successful by design, by being yourself. Don't find the stuff outside. Then Disney, also very interesting client of ours. So interesting enough, I mean, Mickey itself is not an original. It's a Spanish comic figure, which was used for centuries. It was actually bad red. And then Walt Disney, loving Germany, especially the colors, black, red, and yellow, which actually our soccer team colors too, but no pun intended. And so the point actually is that when we went to Disney, that we wanted to do products. They just sort of put a logo on and take $50 more from everybody, but that doesn't make the kids happy. So we said we work with kids and families and develop products which are like a Disney figure and live out there. So the ears actually are a bit illogical because the ears are loudspeakers, but the kids didn't care. Later we have some more examples on that. BMW, very interesting design language. And Chris Bagel got criticized a lot for being so different. And I have to tell you, design is not about beauty. Design is not about being adopted to whatever else likes. Design is about provocation, about unique, and being irreplaceable by anything else. Naturally, the BMW guys didn't get the ideas by themselves. It was actually done by Darth Vader and George Lucas. And they don't agree to it, but there's no lie in design because you see it, you know. In worlds you can hide your past and whatever, but in design you see it. And I think it's a great idea because it's my favorite character in movies. You always have to be the good guy. One day you want to be the bad guy. It's much more interesting. And actually that brings us to the next step. Looking at South Africa, you already are ahead of the curve because you have not gone into this crazy commodity-driven commercialism where everything looks alike. You know, whether you have Philips or Sony or Samsung on a cell phone today, or Nokia or Motorola, most of them, they look alike. And as my son, who went into American history and American native history a lot, he said the American natives called the immigrants from England the box people because they came in boxes over the ocean. They erected boxes, they carry boxes, they package their stuff in boxes, they're the box people. And if you look at the Cherokees and Apaches and Hurons and so on, they lived in tents and everything what they did was organic, except for the graphics, which were very geometric. And actually, if you look at what happens, also they didn't get to hip hop by accident because my daughter is a pretty good dancer and she loves this American way of dancing, not the European ballet. And so we also meet a lot of interesting people. And I think hip hop, for example, is a very, very nice art form. Like any music advancement is, you first have to look what is good about it, interesting about it. If you don't like it, it's a good idea to get into it because if you already like it, it's probably old. It's also about trends. There are no trends. If you see it, it's over. For example, I have still cool in, and my two sons said, Dad, you're a man of the 80s. It's about fat, and my little guy said it's icy. So ultimately it comes back to being fun. For example, baby fat, Morris is the husband of Fat Farm. And the cell phone, give you an idea, the cell phone sells for $800 because it is baby fat, has a fake diamond on the hinge. And normally Sprint Nextel gives the same phone away for $49. So people, please use it so we can sell our services. She sells it for $800. So there's something interesting to learn from it. Harley Davidson, a very bad motorcycle. To be totally honest, but interesting. I mean, you can buy a German BMW, but then I prefer German Porsche, which is a bit more interesting. But the Harley Davidson is really inclusive, so which means to become a certain kind of person, you have to be a certain kind of person, you have to be willing to take a certain kind of pain. You want Sure, you have to be a good mechanic, otherwise you have to employ one. But the following is fanatical, and my brother has 4 of them, and he's a dry engineer and builds factories, but I always admire him, what he goes through for his motorcycles. And for him, it's just irreplaceable. So it gives you one idea of what a tribal product. Or hard candy. Some people in LA didn't like what the cosmetic industry did because it was just so commercial, naturally Americans even more than in Europe. And then they invented hard candy. And it became a global brand, but naturally for certain people only. Or very different, fisherman's friend. Nobody can eat it except when you're really sick or working at the coastline in Northern Europe, where all the senses for taste have already gone away anyway. But people love it. And naturally Gorbachev helped, actually Russia's other code, to make it popular, or Boost, one of our clients, where they took, for example, Motorola phones, but want to get a service which is more surf culture, Australian guys coming over. And what can we do with the California culture? The key issue is it's a friend finder. So if you have certain friends, or Scion, the Toyota brand, originally it was a box car done by the cheap brand Daihatsu for small business in Tokyo. And it turned out into a cult car for young people because with so much parking going on during driving, you had more space in the car. And finally, even Nike goes to tribal advertising, tribal communication, and also tribal behaviors, because they also discovered that football fans, or soccer fans as we call them, in America have a very tribal behavior. Finally, then all this said, how we go to design, actually we sit on tables still, sometimes we don't have tables. It's pretty organized, but that's the only chart I promise. The point is a little bit, when you move into innovation space and you want to do new things, you also have to put some money up and you also want some return. So if you look at the overall picture here, if you evolve things, you cannot win much, you don't lose much. That's where most companies are. And that's actually about 90% of our business, because most of our clients don't want to go bankrupt. If you want to expand, it's a bit more courageous, and you do a bit more, but the risk is also a bit more. What it really brings you the big win, if you envision something like Akio Morita was working at Sony, like Steve Jobs is working at Apple, like some other people are working, they really take a risk, but also then use kind of a safety net strategy to make clear for that. So evolving, naturally, you just do your business as you have it, go a bit ahead of it. Pictures speak more than 1,000 words. It's a very slow computer, sorry for that. It's an Apple. Yeah, it doesn't. That's the only revenge Microsoft has against Apple, that they make Microsoft software hard to run on Apple. So a Mac actually has to work, I think, 5 times as much as a Windows computer. So Logitech, they do this camera, and we want to make it a bit more friendly for video conferencing, and so it had more idea of a human eye, bit of a camera, but pretty conservative. Then if you expand, product we did was a Yahoo Music Store. Yahoo has normally very, like Google, horrible UI. And I mean, despite all the other stuff they do for people, the experience, you have it from a human experience point of view, is pretty poor. And then we convinced Yahoo to have a little bit more of a cultural thing in, because it's about music, it's about media. It doesn't come in single line code. And finally, if you envision really wild-eyed, go very, very long-term minded, and you have to do experience-driven scenarios. You cannot just say that's a good idea and you put $50 million into it, or 100 million, or $1 billion, and it will be a good success, we promise. Nobody believes you. But what it can do is simulation. The interesting thing about this project is called this Media Center for HP. The vision for HP moving to entertainment, rather than just sitting on printing and tech and servers and all this stuff, where you can never succeed anymore because nobody cares. This project survives, and even the new management loves it and develops it. So we analyzed the Disney characters and created character language. Then we did a design, we did screens, and that was the interesting thing, that the kids we worked with, they wanted the computer to look like an animal, like a being, like a character. And finally, naturally goes to production. And you promote and sell it. And finally, people enjoy it. In that case, People is a school we support in New York, together with the Kennedy Foundation, where it's proven that if you give good education to people, they can go anywhere in the world. It's really very decisive what you do with kids in the early age, and not only when they are what you call disadvantaged and all this stuff. And education is everything. And finally, coming to our own people, it's on the left of the strategists and all the stuff between. Actually, there are some designers in Frog 2, about 200. And on the right bottom, I think they put that in for me. I'm still the oldest so far, but I think we should never leave things alone and move on ahead. So finally, how do we move into a more African attitude in this whole thing? And at first, it's about insights. So if you look what you can buy today, you can buy everything, but what you cannot buy is insight. You have to make a point to analyze everything and find out what you really want to do for yourself, for your company, for your life, and for your country. And give you an example, how do you get from insights to ideas? One is by association, what the classic way, what has been done somewhere else. What is disruptive, what has never been done before, always a good way to start. What is a provocation, what does not make sense, give an idea. That at GM we once said, why don't we make cars without wheels? Because that is crazy, like the Adidas ball. But the point was, we said 22 hours of the day the car is not driven. So it doesn't have wheels. And then we got a couple ideas about the interior. Also about fiction, what should be possible? If you look at especially software, digital stuff, you can go to science fiction and stories, what people thought in the old days about messages coming out of space and stuff, and bring this into your ideas. And then if you have an idea, it's not done yet. Then innovation starts. And that starts with you have a new idea, an opportunity. Then you have to envision how they will change the world, because it may be bad. If you say, okay, I want to do this and this technology, what does it mean? We have a lot of industrial pollution. We have a lot of human interaction. Also offer the idea. We do it to clients. Clients do it to customers. We check it. We need support, otherwise we cannot continue. You have to set up a structure and project management, very important, because too many designers are too chaotic. That's why most design studios are maximum of 8 people, and 4 or 5, and they cannot go beyond that because it's too much egotism. So put that aside, work with others. And it's also important to adopt any new idea to reality and prove the benefits. What will it do? And then finally create a support structure and implement. And finally, provide the leadership to take it to the people. And then again, brings people like Rakamir from Louis Vuitton or Morita or Steve Jobs or Obama and Bill Gates. They take the stuff to the people. The point was, we did one project with some friends about crutches. And it gives an idea how you look at it. And the first thing is that the crutch, I saw somebody walk this morning, it goes under the arm where it kills your lymph nodes and blocks your blood vessels, really unhealthy. It's hurting your ligaments. And so we looked, what is an idea? The inspiration came from transformer toys, because you want the crutch to transform. And then we went to this point where we said, from the classic thing, like it was always done, to a more modern thing, which is more ergonomic and more anatomic. And then you would ask, what is the transformer function? Because of the movement, you conserve the energy with springs, and it's also a flashlight and a little battery. Okay, what is the insight about wireless devices? And I call it very simple, they're wireless devices. I mean, you have to ask to shut them off. But the real big problem is that the hardware is done like a telephone box. The software is still done like computer screens. The content is still broadcast, and the sensors are still only a camera and a microphone. So when we looked around, what is really the inspiration for the future of wireless in general? And we call it digital flexibility, which brought us to what we call a digital gel. It's a flexible, fluffy product, and you can talk to your hand, has motors in it, and you can have gestures. That's people like me talk with their hands a lot. Will be the ideal product. So many good things you actually build for yourself. Finally, competence is important. creativity is important, consistency is important. The thing about Louis Vuitton, by the way, it's very often misunderstood. It's not about design, but it's about being unique and good quality. So a lot of the early testing we did in the 70s was how can we market brown bags when it's used by such diverse people and diverse people in the world? And we found the only connecting element is disconnect. So it never is a good match. Because it's never a good match, we're out of all the fashion discussions season by season. So we are not in, we are not out, we're always out. And because we're always out, we're always in. And that was a very early teaching I got from the French that aesthetic doesn't count. It's about something else. It's a whole idea about chic and so on. Then competence, actually you want competence in the airline cockpit. So designing with Lufthansa and Airbus is much more about ergonomics, but also the pilots want to know we are pilots. They don't want to sit like in a family car and fly the airplane. It has to be an airplane. Or creativity, Nike. I mean, the whole idea about Nike is expressed by human beings. It's not so much technology and this and that. It's really what people do with it, about the experience, and how it emanates. And running improves your life. Or about consistency. Actually, that's one German brand which is probably the most conservative on earth, but does a good job about a consistent brand message. And when we also consult with them, I must say, but the funny thing was they expected us to bring all those rules and be the good guys. And I showed them a race movie, which I had the luck to be the race with my dad in the 50s. And I showed them the race movie and said, that's the passion of why this brand is still in the hearts of people. And if the people who experience this will have died off, the young kids never will understand why there should be a passion in the brand. So I went back to more emotional designs, bring back more shape, not just be too stodgy. And finally, I create Your Way. Now we are back in South Africa, I hope. And it's a bit provocative what I say now. Apple says think different, but don't think like Apple. It's way too boring. We did something which could be the media product for South Africa. We did tribalize the industry because the kids don't want to run around what other 50 kids in the same neighborhood have. And speaking of carbon neutral, that's also something that I work for. I think in the future we will have a lot of disconnect between nature and industry. So reconnect nature and industry, make aware of what we do. And you see the technology is kind of a projection stuff, which is already possible in the labs. So you do not need a screen, and it projects the stuff in the air in front of you. And also connect and experience, which means no matter where you are in the world, bring your own character more out and ultimately be African. Thank you.